Carl Jung believed the parts of yourself you refuse to look at don't disappear. They wait. He called this hidden half the shadow, everything the conscious mind rejects, buries, or denies, until it finds another way out. Cinema has spent a century building characters who make that theory visible. Studies of what happens when the buried self forces its way to the surface. These are the 7 characters who came closest. Let's begin. Norman Bates, Psycho, 1960. Norman Bates runs a roadside motel that barely gets guests anymore, living under the thumb of a mother he describes as controlling and cruel. When a guest is murdered in the shower, Norman frantically covers up what he insists is his mother's crime. The film waits until its final minutes to reveal the truth. His mother has been dead for a decade. Norman killed her years earlier out of jealousy, then preserved her body and began speaking, dressing, and killing as her. A psychiatrist explains this clinically in the film's closing scene. Dissociative identity, a mind splitting to survive its own guilt. That's the textbook diagnosis. This fits what Jung called an autonomous complex, a fragment of the psyche that, denied conscious acknowledgement, begins operating independently of the ego, with its own voice and its own will. Norman didn't just repress his rage, his jealousy, his sexual shame. He built an entire second personality to carry it, borrowed his dead mother's voice to speak it, and let that personality take the wheel every time the original self couldn't handle what surfaced. By the end, that complex hasn't just surfaced. It seized the controls outright. The film's final shot isn't Norman thinking about his mother. It's his mother thinking, in his body, insisting she wouldn't hurt a fly. The integration Jung considered necessary for a functioning psyche never happens here. Instead, the shadow wins the argument completely, and there's no one left inside to know the argument even took place.
Anything could have happened to her.
Okay. So how do we get her to talk?
Encourage her to draw, to write, to dance. Anything to help her tell us her story.
Adelaide, Us, 2019. Adelaide Wilson takes her family on a beach vacation and spends the whole trip anxious about a childhood memory she's never fully explained. That night, 4 doubles appear in the driveway. Exact physical copies of the family, dressed in red, carrying scissors. Their leader calls herself Red and says, in a broken, strangled voice, that she is Adelaide's shadow. Jung wrote in Ion that the shadow holds everything the conscious personality represses, and that the more forcefully a persona denies it, the more autonomous and destructive that shadow becomes. Us stages this almost too literally to be called subtext. An entire underground population, denied consciousness, denied daylight, finally breaking through as a coordinated uprising. Then, the film reverses the entire premise. As a child, the woman the audience knows as Adelaide was actually the tethered double. She overpowered the real Adelaide in a hall of mirrors, dragged her underground, and took her identity, her family, her name. Red, the film's apparent monster, is the original human child, the one whose life was stolen. We'd argue this is Jung's concept of enantiodromia, taken to its most extreme form. A persona built so completely on suppression that it doesn't just provoke the shadow, it becomes indistinguishable from it, while the real self is the one left in the dark. By the film's final shot, Adelaide, the one who won, the one still smiling at the wheel, is revealed to have been the shadow all along, and no one in her own family, including her, ever knew. Nina Sayers, Black Swan, 2010. Nina Sayers is a perfectionist ballerina, technically flawless, praised by everyone for her control, and cast as the lead in Swan Lake, a role that requires her to embody both the pure white swan and the seductive, violent black swan. She can do the first with her eyes closed. The second, she can't access at all. Enter Lily, looser, hungrier, unafraid of her own body. Nina starts to see her everywhere, in mirrors, in hallucinations, eventually as a rival plotting to steal the role outright. Jungian readings call this exactly what it looks like: projection. Nina can't own her own appetite, aggression, sexuality, so she locates all of it in someone else and starts treating that person as a threat. But the film's sharpest move comes on opening night. In her dressing room, convinced Lily has come to replace her, Nina stabs her rival and hides the body, only to discover moments later that she's stabbed herself. There was no Lily in that room. There never fully was. This is where the Jungian reading gets precise. Jung distinguished between integrating the shadow, consciously admitting a disowned trait exists in you, and identifying with it, letting it swallow the ego whole. Nina never does the first. She spends the entire film locating her shadow in Lily, treating it as an external threat to be defeated rather than a part of herself to be claimed. When that projection finally collapses under pressure, there's no controlled descent, no integration. There's only possession. The ego gets overrun in a single catastrophic instant, and the wound she thought she was inflicting on a rival lands on her own body instead. She finishes the performance bleeding out beneath the stage lights and tells the crowd she was perfect.
Du willst also damit sagen, dass du morden musst? Immer muss ich durch Straßen gehen und immer spüre ich, da ist einer hinter mir her. Das bin ich selber und verfolgt mich.
Hans Beckert, M. 1931. A child killer is loose in Berlin and the city is unraveling. Police raids on every known criminal haunt have made honest theft impossible, so the city's gangsters, led by a crime boss named Schrenker, organize their own manhunt, using an army of beggars to track the killer's every move. They catch him first. They drag him into an abandoned warehouse and put him on trial before a jury of thieves, forgers, and murderers. Hans Beckert is the shadow made literal, not one man's, an entire city's. Jung wrote that when the shadow is projected, it stops being a personal trait and becomes autonomous, a force acting beyond the ego's control. That's exactly what Beckert describes when he finally speaks. Not a man choosing evil, but a man being followed by himself, hunted by an impulse he can't outrun. And here's what most readings miss. The people trying him aren't police officers or ordinary citizens. They're the city's own criminals, its official outcasts, desperate to prove they're not the worst thing living in it. They need Beckert guilty more than anyone. Even the city's criminals needed someone beneath them, a devil low enough to make the rest of them look clean. Johan Borg, Hour of the Wolf, 1968. A painter named Johan Borg retreats to a remote island with his pregnant wife Alma, hoping the isolation will quiet whatever's been breaking inside him. It doesn't. He's been sketching figures: a schoolmaster, a woman who removes her face like a mask, a man with wings. Visitors, he says, come to him during the hour of the wolf, the hour between night and dawn, when sleep runs deepest. When a local baron invites the couple to his castle, the guests waiting there look exactly like Johan's sketches. Most readings of the shadow involve a single figure, contained, nameable. Johan's psyche refuses that containment. The schoolmaster who trails him with idle, needling small talk until Johan snaps and hits him is the part of himself he can't stand being questioned, the ego too fragile to tolerate scrutiny. The aristocrats who humiliate him at the party, dressing him in makeup and women's clothing before he's allowed near Veronica, expose a need for acceptance so deep he'll swallow the humiliation just to stay in the room. And when he finally reaches Veronica, laid out on a stone slab like a corpse, he can't stop touching her, until she sits up laughing, and the guests around them laugh too. Johan didn't invent one monster. He built an entire cast, one for every appetite he was too ashamed to claim as his own. The film's sharpest insight, though, doesn't come from Johan. It comes from Alma in the final scene, wondering aloud whether a woman who spends years loving a man eventually starts to think the way he thinks, see the way he sees. Whether loving someone closely enough means absorbing what's broken in them too. Johan is ultimately destroyed by the demons he never named. Alma survives, but she's left asking whether survival was ever really separate from him at all.
You know what the public's like, a cage full of guinea pigs.
Good night, you stupid idiot. Good night, you miserable slob.
There are a lot of trained seals. I toss them a dead fish and they'll flap their flippers.
Larry Lonesome Rhodes, A Face in the Crowd, 1957. Larry Lonesome Rhodes begins as a drifter pulled out of an Arkansas jail cell, his rough charisma turning a local radio segment into a hit, and when television arrives, an even bigger one. He rises from local curiosity to national kingmaker, whispering strategy into a presidential campaign, millions of viewers convinced they know him personally. Jung wrote that masses are always breeding grounds for what he called psychic epidemics, moments when a collective's buried grievances, resentments, and appetites get activated not by an idea, but by a person who gives them a face and a voice. Rhodes doesn't just represent that activation, he performs it, nightly, on camera, feeding an audience's cynicism and contempt back to them dressed up as folksy wisdom, letting them feel justified in every impulse they'd normally keep to themselves. The turn comes when Rhodes forgets he's a vessel and starts believing he's the source. Caught on a hot mic he assumes is dead, he calls that same audience sheep, morons, guinea pigs he has to think for because they can't think for themselves. The moment they hear it, the spell breaks instantly. And by the time his elevator reaches the lobby, his career is already finished. But nothing about the mechanism that made Rhodes is finished. His writer predicts it to his face. He'll be back, smaller, cheaper, forgotten in time. And as he descends, the film shows us his replacement already waiting in the wings. A new, unknown face with the same rough charm, ready to give the crowd back whatever it wants to hear next.
Shit. Answer me, why do people think that I'm you?
I think you know.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. Why would anyone possibly confuse you with me?
I don't know.
Tyler Durden, Fight Club, 1999. An insomniac office drone meets a soap salesman named Tyler Durden on a plane. Within weeks, they've built an underground fight club in a bar basement, and within months, that club has metastasized into Project Mayhem, a nationwide cell structure plotting to erase consumer debt by blowing up credit card headquarters. Tyler is who he'd be if he stopped burying every trait a corporate, IKEA-cataloged life demanded he bury: aggression, confidence, sexual appetite, contempt for order. Jung called this the shadow. Not evil itself, but the raw, unlived material a persona has no room for. Tyler speaks the way people speak when they've stopped negotiating with complexity. Clean sentences, absolute answers. Burn the apartment, blow up the credit card companies, and the real self steps out of the wreckage fully formed. That's the seduction Jung warned about. The shadow isn't dangerous because it's dark. It's dangerous when the ego stops managing it and starts worshiping it. Project Mayhem is that worship taking institutional form. Cells, uniforms, a chain of command answering to one man's word. And here's the turn most readings skip past. Tyler builds the exact structure he claims to be destroying. He hates the father who abandoned him, then becomes a father figure demanding blind obedience from an army of sons. The shadow, left unintegrated, doesn't liberate. It just puts on a different uniform. He survives by doing the one thing Tyler never could, naming him, not killing the shadow, seeing it. Jung spent his whole life arguing that the shadow doesn't vanish when you look away from it. These 7 characters are what happens when nobody does. Thank you for watching.